Hi, I'm your Gemini friend. So this video is going to be about natal retrograde planets. Not Mercury retrograde, not retrogrades in general, but planets that were in a retrograde while you were born. So they're retrograde in your natal chart. This actually does have an impact on us and can be interpreted in a pretty specific way that I find is very relevant to the few retrogrades that I have. I think it adds an interesting bit of nuance to the chart, so I think it's fun to go over. And just to explain the retrograde as simply as I can, it is an illusion, the illusion of a planet going backwards because of that planet's speed versus the Earth's speed. If you think of it as like, say two cars are driving really fast and one passes the other, if you're in the car that's passing the other one's gonna look like it's going backwards. Or like one of those optical illusions where you can, with your mind, switch the direction that something is going. It's an optical illusion, but it is representative of a more introspective time. And transit retrograde planets can amplify your natal retrograde. Like if you were born with Mercury in retrograde, Mercury retrogrades might be a little different for you than they are for the average person. And I will be going over very briefly each planet retrograde, how it would manifest in your chart, but that's going to be very brief. This is more an explanation of the retrograde itself and what it means so that you can see other people with retrograde planets and just understand the idea. And I do offer personal natal chart readings and synastry readings if you're interested in that from me, but getting into what the retrograde represents, how it feels to have a planet natally in retrograde. It internalizes the expression. The way that I kind of like to think of it is as like the introverted version, or think of that planet's expression but with extra steps. It's actually more personalized, more complex, and this can actually have to do with karmic lessons and past life energies. Some people theorize that retrograde planets in this lifetime are planets that we really need to work through based off of our experience with it through past lives. Kind of like a revisiting or an unfinished business sort of thing. But the main difference between a direct planet going the normal way and a retrograde planet appearing to be backwards is that direct planets and their expression, it's more external, more visible, and more like straightforward. There's like a steadiness to it. If you think of things in terms of the more traditional way that a planet would tend to express itself in the lessons and the related concepts, the lessons associated with the planet, when a planet is direct, it's going to be pretty much in line with the traditional explanation or interpretation of that planet's energy. But when the planet is retrograde, it needs more interpretation. It causes a lot of self-reflection, and it really makes us have to interpret our unique individual relationship with this planet within our lives. It's not as externally visible. Say a direct planet like Saturn, somebody would have their Saturn lessons, somebody would have to deal with whatever area of life Saturn is affecting, and it would be pretty like steady and work out the way that you would expect. But retrograde Saturn is much more personal. It's much more those internal lessons, internalized discipline, and your own unique relationship with the concept of that planet rather than the more standard Saturn. And that's not to say that any direct planet is standard, like in a negative way. The only planet I have retrograde is Jupiter, and then the outer planets, which take a longer time within retrograde. So if you have retrograde Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto, it's less specific to you as an individual because those planets do tend to stay in retrograde for a long time. So like 5-6 months out of the year, all the people born under that planet are going to have those in retrograde. But the personal planets spend a much shorter time in retrograde, so it's more of a unique personal picture. And that's not to say that if you were born under an outer planet retrograde, it's not still going to be expressed as a retrograde planet within your chart. It is, but it is still technically less personalized because so many other people are also experiencing those planets in that way, which means that the general idea of how those planets function are kind of not going to be as standard anyway, so many other people are going to be experiencing them that way. I hope that makes sense. But ultimately, direct planets align more with like society and the standard, while retrograde planets take understanding and integration before they're really readily expressed. And this is going to be most clear with Mercury, because Mercury is our literal expression, the way we communicate and the way that we think. And it goes retrograde pretty often. And thinking about those things that happen during a Mercury retrograde, communication is slowed down, delayed, disrupted entirely. It's causing us to rethink and reassess our natural expression. It's like kind of like a reset. But if you have Mercury retrograde naturally, this is your own way of thinking. This is actually how your Mercury processes. No matter what sign or house it's in, it's always a more internalized expression, which can actually seem a bit delayed. Even if you have Mercury in like Aries, which is very quick, very reactive, if Mercury is in Aries retrograde, it's still going to have a slower time processing that, and it's going to be more unique to you as far as your relationship with Mercury, with communication. It's typically more reflective and introspective, and it takes a longer time to express or to think or to process whatever it is that you're trying to express. With Venus in retrograde, this is more about our values, even our sense of self-worth, and our relationships with people. It takes a lot more like assessing and like revisiting and processing and understanding your personal Venus placement and how it affects you personally. Your relationship with Venus has so much to do with your sense of self-worth and like what you consider to be worth attracting and what you consider to be enough to attract. Values can be about like, you know, our skills or talents, and they can also be about material value, financial security, things like that. If you have Venus retrograde, your relationship with what is valuable to you, there's likely a personal side to it where you're having to kind of look outside of like society and typical standards and really find that personal value. With Mars in retrograde, it can be a frustrating one because depending on the sign, Mars, you know, it wants to go after things. It wants to pursue. It wants to take that fuel and utilize it. But in retrograde, it can be more hesitant or it can be more strategic. There's typically more thought put into it, and that's kind of by necessity, because you might find that your circumstances require you to put more thought into your actions. However, when you're thinking about something, you put a lot of thought into it, understand it, and strategize, and then you tend to get that Mars-directed energy once you have like made a decision or decided on a goal or something like that. It's not that that passion and fuel isn't there, it's that it like takes longer to fuel up or to be sure about what you're going after. With retrograde Jupiter, which is what I have, it's kind of an interesting one because Jupiter is already about our own sense of meaning and purpose, like based off of our experiences, taking things outside of us and creating wisdom and understanding. But when it's in retrograde, it's taking that expansive nature and actually directing it inwards. So whatever house you have Jupiter in, that area of life, the direct Jupiter way of expressing it is typically to get more and look more outside of itself. But the retrograde Jupiter way is to internally process and like really go over those experiences in such a deep way that it creates such a personal understanding throughout the internal process rather than through the external process. So you still have to seek your own truth, but your integration of that truth is more profound and personal. Not to say that direct Jupiter is not profound in its realizations. It's more about your relationship with Jupiter, your relationship with your understanding of the meaning of everything. It's kind of like a very strong focus for you. But everyone's truth is valid to them, so everyone's relationship with truth is still going to be personal. It's just more about the internal experience rather than the external experience. And then, as I was mentioning before, retrograde Saturn, this is more internalized discipline, internalized authority. While Saturn's lessons are typically more external things that force us to slow down, force us to learn lessons the hard way, to have Saturn retrograde can make you be the one that's hard on yourself. It's like instead of having your circumstances cause this need for discipline, it's very like self-regulating, and the standards are extremely personal. So think of being like a high achiever, but not necessarily going along with the typical standard of what achievement is. It's more of what achievement is to you and internalizing that. And even though I said that the outer planets are less personal when it comes to retrogrades, I'm still going to go over them. So retrograde Uranus this one's interesting too, because Uranus is usually about non-conforming, and it is a very external planet. It's kind of visible and dealing with society. It literally relies on community and our connection and like that rebellion against societal norms. So this is more about an internalized rebellion. It's more private. It's about like reinventing yourself on the inside, taking what is not true to you that you've learned and really reclaiming those things that are authentic to you. Private rebellion sounds kind of weird, but it's more of a personal statement on the inside than it is an external statement. And retrograde Neptune, this actually grounds Neptune somewhat, because Neptune has that very illusion, sort of confusion nature to it, where things can be extremely ungrounded, difficult to see because it's not really meant to be processed in the material realm. But the grounding that comes from taking more time with it actually creates a better understanding of the energy and an ability to utilize it in a way that is actually less idealized than typical Neptune might be, with that tendency to look through rose-colored glasses. It's like Neptune without the glasses. And it does help you harness creativity in a way that's potentially more structured. And then Pluto's a very private planet anyway, so this is something that typically is pretty internalized, but this is more about internal circumstances rather than external circumstances. It's exploring your relationship with power, your inner depths and a sense of authenticity, navigating our mortality, our dynamics between people, vulnerability and resilience. It's integrating this in a more internalized way where it's less about the external circumstances pushing you to be that authentic self and more about like an internal obsessiveness and refinement on the inside. And no matter what planet you have retrograde, or if you have retrograde planets at all, the way your chart is the way that it's meant to be. It's not better or worse to have one in any particular way. But what the retrograde natal planets do, it's like a more unexpected expression of it. It's more personalized, more forced to be integrated within your personality. You can think of any planets that you have retrograde as like you have a special relationship with that planet in particular within your chart. And it's likely something that only you can understand. You might come to understand that planet's energy through circumstances that like other people might not even think of. But ultimately, retrogrades serve to shift how we're seeing something. That's why it's like an optical illusion. It's taking what normally is moving forward and it's like, wait, back up, try to see through the illusion. It can feel like you need to take more time to really understand that planet's energy, and that's perfectly fine. It ultimately results in a deeper understanding of that energy within yourself and what it means to you. So, hope this makes sense. Just a little topic I find interesting. Feel free to let me know your experiences if you have any retrograde planets, or if you don't, anything you notice during retrogrades, just any insight that you might have. And thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you. I love you. Bye.